Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to Métis Nation of Alberta. I raise my hands up to you, hi, for this wonderful opportunity. I'm really grateful. So today we're going to be talking about sustainability, but what's going to be different about this conversation is bringing in cultural empowerment. So when we're talking about sustainability today, it's important for us as Métis and Indigenous people to remember that this idea of sustainable practices has always been within our communities and our culture, and it's just been lost within the past few decades within colonization practices. So during this presentation, I want to remind us all that we have always had these practices within our communities, and it's really important for us stepping forward to remember this as the leaders of climate initiatives. So today, I think I have to, there. So today I'm going to do a little bit more of an introduction about myself. I'll tell you more about where I come from and what I do. And then I'm going to share a little bit with you about what has been going on in the community that I come from up in my territory. So I'm going to tell you about some of the climate damages that have been happening within the past few years. And from there, we'll talk about what fast fashion is and the harm that it actually is having on global warming today that I think is more difficult knowledge to come by. I don't think we realize how impactful our fast fashion trends are on global warming. So we're going to dive a little bit more into what's actually going on behind the scenes. And then I want to end it with, again, talking about this empowerment piece that we have as Indigenous people, and just remembering that we have always been self-sufficient communities. Today, we have to talk a lot about the trauma that our communities have gone through, especially this week during Reconciliation Week. And it's important for us to also remember to empower ourselves and remember that we have always been a self-sufficient people. So that will be mostly the presentation today. And then I'll also end with talking about a project I've started, creating ribbon skirts that are 100% coming from the earth's materials. So before we get started, I thought we should take a second to just look at what material our clothing is made out of. So if everyone wants to take a look at their tag on their whatever they're wearing, or if you have something nearby, and type it in the chat just so we can kind of start out this discussion about fast fashion with understanding what materials we're wearing. And then later on, I'm going to be sharing with you what's going on with these materials behind the scene and how much of an impact they actually are having in harming the planet. So for me, I have, my shirt is 100% polyester. I checked before. So we have cotton, nice. Tencel, I actually don't know what tencel is. I'll have to look that up after. Wow, lots of cotton, bamboo, that's really great. Nylon, rayon, polyester, nice, lots of cotton. That's great, everyone. I don't even know how to pronounce that. Irresponsible. I don't know what that one is either. Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for sharing. So this discussion is really important because later on, I'm going to get into the different materials that we're wearing and what their life cycle is looking like on Earth. So thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. And let's keep in mind the materials that we're wearing for later on. So I will just share a little bit more about myself. So again, my name is Alexa Lizotte. I come from a family of Lizottes, Lamberts, and Pauls. So my Métis community that I come from is called North Vermilion Settlement, and it's mostly known as Buttertown to the locals and may even be across Alberta. And it's a really small community that's right across the river from Fort Vermilion. So if you haven't heard of Fort Vermilion, it's about 8 hours north of Edmonton. And if you haven't heard of Fort Vermilion, you might have heard of High Level, and that's kind of the bigger town that's around. And it's about 1 hour east of Fort Vermilion. So my father is from this community, the Métis community of North Vermilion Settlement. He was raised here with his 11 brothers and sisters, and he was raised, you know, in a traditional Métis community and family. But because of also the heartbreak that we have in our communities, he moved away when he was a young man, and he actually moved he had an opportunity to go to the States with his brother-in-law and my auntie. And so he did that, and he actually ended up later settling in Nevada. And that is where myself and my brothers were born, in the Mojave Desert. And so growing up, we were always told we were always told we were Métis, but we didn't have such an understanding of what that meant. And my dad was always kind of shy to share with us culture and traditions, because he also wanted to keep us away from the heartbreak that happens in our communities. And so growing up, this was really difficult for me. I didn't really understand my identity or who I was, and I was constantly being asked, and I didn't know what to say. So anyway, fast forward to when I was 18, I decided to move to Vancouver, BC, and this was kind of where my reconnection journey began. And it was mostly with beading. So I began beading, and just slowly over the years, it really helped me connect, and it grew my connections with other Indigenous people who came from across Turtle Island. And I was able to gain some more confidence in my identity and learn about my history and my community. And so what actually ended up happening was, in 2020, there was a really devastating flood to my community, which I will go deeper into later in the presentation. And I had the opportunity to work for Red Cross as a flood recovery worker. And so I was then fully immersed within my community, and that was a really big piece of my identity formation, and something I'm really, really grateful for today, even though the reason that I was brought there was devastating. And so I was able to work for the Métis local there under the Red Cross, and this led to a year of really, really deep work in reconnecting, and this also led me into sewing. So this was where I really dove deep into my sewing work, and now today, this is mostly what I do. I sew ribbon skirts and shirts, and later on I'm going to be able to share with you my new project on sustainable skirts. And so, yeah, that's where I am today, and we'll get into the more sustainable practices now. So again, while we're talking about this topic, we want to understand what's going on in the North. So when we're living in the cities in the South, sometimes it's hard to know what's actually going on up in the North. And we're seeing climate change effects at a much more rapid rate up North. And it's been really devastating to a lot of people. And so that's what I'm going to talk about for a minute here. Before we dive into what we can do to help. So I wanted to share these two photos because I think it demonstrates the part of the devastation that my community has seen. So this first photo is back from 2011 when I visited my community, and the Peace River was always known for having a lot of vegetation and trees alongside it. And this was how it looked in 2011 before any flooding happened. The last flooding that happened was in 1934. And then fast forward to the 2020 flood, when I'm living in my community in 2021, this is what the river looks like now. So you can see it looks pretty bare, and I think it's a good demonstration of kind of the harm that has happened. So I'll get more into the timeline here. So in my community in 1934, there was a really, really big flood that was documented. It was known to be really devastating. It was in a lot of newspaper articles and really well documented. And it was said to take out basically the whole community on the north and south side of the river, which would be North Vermilion Settlement, Buttertown, and Fort Vermilion. So this was always a known fact. And then we get to 2018, and the spring ice breakup of the Peace River leads to flooding on the north side of the river, which is only the North Vermilion Settlement or Buttertown. And so when this is happening, we see the story of it's just the 100-year flood. That's kind of where everyone's mind was at. And so it wasn't that big of a deal yet. We had a quick response from emergency teams, and the homes that were on that side of the river were able to be reconstructed. And those Métis families were able to have a lot of help, who were mostly elders. So then fast forward to 2020 is when we actually get the most devastating flood. And this is when 150 homes are lost. So this is when this story of the 100-year flood starts to kind of break down, because we only see a 2-year difference. And now we have an even bigger flood that happened than in 2018. So in 2020, there's a flooding of both sides of the river. So again, those same families that already had their home damaged in 2018, their homes are damaged again. And then we have the south side of the river in Fort Vermilion, where so many homes are damaged and lost. And so again, there's 150 homes lost. So this process actually leads to a flood mitigation plan from the county to actually start moving the communities. And so what's being said here is, this is not a one-time event, and this is going to be happening now, and you need to move. So we see processes start happening around October. It's still going on now. It's going to be a long time. But basically we're seeing the flood zones that they call it, which are basically just the lower land of both of the areas. We're seeing people asked to be moved, and this is really difficult for a lot of the community members, because Fort Vermilion is one of the oldest communities in Alberta. It has a lot of Métis history. Our Métis people are really tied to the land there, and it's really, really difficult. So at the same time, the families are also they are obviously wanting to avoid this anxiety and fear that is happening every spring now with spring ice breakup. And so it's a really, really difficult situation to navigate. And like I said, that's still going on today. So now this year, we actually see another flood happen in a nearby Dene community, which is really, really devastating. Again, we have 1,000 people flee their homes in Chate, which is the Dene community. But we also have 30 families have to evacuate from the nearby Métis settlement of Paddle Prairie as well. So again, we're seeing this pattern start to happen now. So now I just want to show you to kind of summarize this story of what's happening up in Northern Alberta. I want to summarize this by this great video that that was done, and it focuses more in different communities. There's some in the Northwest Territories as well, and I think this video shows really well what's really going on up north. Things that us down in the cities in the south, we may be able to kind of turn off from our brain about what's happening. So I'm going to show you this video for a couple minutes. And I do want to let you know that it can be really difficult to watch, especially if you or your family has gone through this firsthand. It can be re-traumatizing, and it is a difficult one to watch. So if you or your family have gone through this firsthand, and it's a sensitive subject for you, there's no need to watch this. You can go for a walk for a couple minutes. And for everyone else, again, I just want to remind you to be taking care of yourselves during this video.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us. There is a range of extreme weather across this country, a heat wave in central Canada, and catastrophic floods devastating areas in the prairies and the north. This is the town of Hay River, Northwest Territories. It is largely submerged by floodwater. An evacuation order was triggered overnight for the entire town on the edge of Great Slave Lake. The territory says water levels have risen 1.7 meters over the past 3 days. Nearby in northern Alberta, heavy rain and snow melt have forced people from their homes. 3 communities there are under local states of emergency. And in southern Manitoba, overland flood warnings and watches are in place as that saturated province braces for even more rain. Flooding isn't new, of course, but climate scientists have found Canada's north is warming more than twice as fast as regions further south, and that's having a profound impact on the environment and on people's lives. Heather Yurix West has our top story tonight.
Hey, it's roughly 4 o'clock in the morning, and this is Burr Crescent in Hay River.
An entire community, home after home, battered by a frigid flood.
You can see the water's coming up.
We had a major push of ice and water, and it ripped through the town and came through several areas of town that have never seen water. So we've evacuated the whole community.
We heard sirens going off. There was emergency alerts going off on our phone.
Marissa Oteza had little time to gather her young family together and go, opting to drive through the night to seek shelter in Yellowknife, 5 hours away.
As we were evacuating, we could see the water rushing into the neighborhoods, into people's houses and yards. It was kind of surreal.
From the air Thursday, the devastation can be seen with heartbreaking clarity. The local airport entirely underwater. The unprecedented flooding caused by the 1-2 punch of the heavy snowpack melt and a river jammed with breaking ice.
It's pretty tragic for the community. I mean, it's obviously a sad day, but it's also frustrating for people that aren't here. And, you know, they just want to be home. But the reality is ultimately we don't have the infrastructure.
The town of 3,500 is now assessing its water treatment plant and sewage system for damages caused by the flood. There have also been power interruptions, and there is likely to be more flooding ahead as the ice continues to crack.
We have a few kilometers of ice still to deal with, so it's not really safe for most residents to return.
There was a flood in 63 that wasn't this bad.
Areas of the Katladeche First Nation are underwater as well. In total, about 4,000 people have been displaced, with little to do now but watch and wait. Heather Yurix West, Global News.
Southern Manitoba is
Okay. So again, that video is difficult to watch and pretty upsetting what's going on. And as hard as it is to watch and know about, I think it's also really important. So I actually am very grateful to this news team for covering what's going on and having some citizens be able to tell a little bit about their story. And so again, if that is difficult for you, please take a moment to yourself. So now that we have seen some of the details of the damage that is happening up north, we now want to connect this with why are we talking about fashion in this throughout this topic. How does fashion relate to what's going on? And so I think that's why this is such an important discussion, because I think it is pretty unknown. And I know for myself, it was unknown to me for a very long time, the importance of the fibers that we're wearing and the habits of our clothing life cycles that we are using. So when we're talking about fashion, it's really important to talk about this fast fashion pattern that we're seeing today. And just like we heard in our prayer from our elder, they talked about having memories about, you know, our cookums sewing with local materials. And it's such a different world now today. We go to a store and we can buy basically anything we want. So when we're talking about this, we want to remember the difference that we see today. And so I wanted to open question first, what is fast fashion? Just so that we know what we're talking about here. So if anyone feels comfortable sharing in the chat or talking, we'll talk a little bit about what fast fashion is, and then we'll get into the harm that it is having and the relationship it does have with the climate crisis today. Yeah, exactly, Ariana. Thank you. So we're seeing a lot of clothing that is low cost and being mass produced. Yeah, thank you, Millie. Kathy, that's a really great point. It's clothing is often being produced in the global south for sure, and it has to make its way over to here. Yes, Holly.
Yeah, I just would like to share from my own experience. Fast fashion is like very promoted by social media and to have like a fast trend, but at the same time, what was it ended up suffering is the third world countries that are producing those materials. Those workers are paid very low, and they have to produce those materials and those like clothing styles based on social media, simply social media trends. And as I notice now, like the clothes I wear when I was a kid, they last for long and they still look good after a long time. But the clothes I get now from some fast fashion brand, they don't even last a week, and the quality has um very deteriorated just because how low the workers were getting paid and how low cost the material is just to um reduce the cost at all to just to produce a new style to meet the social media trend. Yeah, that's my thought.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Holly, for sharing that. And you bring up a really important point about the role that social media has in today's trends of wanting these fast fashion clothing from certain brands and just their ability to promote it with a lot of our young people today. And thank you so much as well to Hannah. Hannah, you touch on a similar topic with profits in mind. And thank you again, Millie. So thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. I really appreciate that. And I think it's really important to have so many different perspectives when we're looking at what really is fast fashion. So thank you to everyone who shared. I think right now I have my break time, but I'm wondering if maybe we should wait a little bit. Does anyone want to share in the chat if they want to keep going or take a break? Let me know. Okay. Okay, everyone, thank you. Okay, I will keep going and then I think I'll switch the break to a few more slides down. So let's now get into what's really happening with fast fashion. So when we're having this discussion, when we're looking at the harm that fast fashion and fashion in general is having with the climate crisis, there's three main topics that we want to talk about. So my first one here is the CO2 emissions that are happening from our fashion trends. So I came across some really alarming statistics when doing my research for the CO2 emissions that are happening. So a foundation called Ellen MacArthur Foundation, it's based in the UK and they're a really great foundation who work towards research on a more circular economy. So this foundation has done a lot of great research around fashion, and they actually found that 10% of the CO2 emissions coming from our fashion habits it's from fashion, and this is a really alarming number because it's actually more than the combined amount of CO2 emissions of both international air travel and maritime shipping. So I know for myself, when I'm looking at the amount of international travel by plane that's happening, it's really hard for me to believe that the CO2 emissions coming from fashion is actually above that combined with maritime shipping. So I think this fact is really, really important to know when we're participating in these fast fashion trends. And this number is coming from the full life cycle of the piece of clothing. And so like many of you mentioned, we are seeing a lot of our clothing coming from the global south and more vulnerable countries. I know for myself, when I look at most of my tags, most of them are made in more vulnerable countries. And so when we're looking at CO2 emissions, we have to include that in mind, that most of our products are coming from across the world. And so continuing that pattern, it's coming across the world to a store, and then we may even be mailing it further to get it to ourselves if we're shopping online. Or this could also include the purchase of it in person. And then it also includes the end of life cycle of the material going to the landfill and possibly being burned. In relation to this topic, when we're talking about CO2 emissions, we also want to talk about the waste that is a part of the story of the CO2 emissions. So just like I mentioned earlier, we're looking at the full cycle of a fabric and what that looks like. So previously with the CO2 emissions, we're looking at beginning of life to end of life. So again, that fabric being returned to the landfill and what's happening when it is returned to the landfill. And that's when we get into the topic of waste. So the same foundation, Ellen MacArthur Foundation, actually found another really alarming rate when we're looking at landfill and clothing. So they found that estimation of one entire garbage truck is going to the landfill full of clothing every second in the US alone. And I don't need to say that's a really, really large and alarming number. When we are then looking at the clothing's relationship to the landfill, it's really important to look at what is going into the landfill. So yes, we're putting clothing into the landfill, but what is this clothing? And so that's when we get into the discussion of the fabrics that our clothing pieces are, and the importance of the type of fabric that we choose to wear. So again, we're looking at the landfill and how much clothing is going into the landfill. But now we need to look at what's happening when that piece of clothing is in the landfill. So I have a list here of some popular fabrics that are being used today. And there's some really great research around which fabrics are able to be biodegradable and be able to go back to the earth at a much quicker rate than other materials. So a lot of you had 100% cotton clothes, which is so awesome. I know for myself, when I first started learning about this, I realized how much polyester I wear and the problem that we are seeing with polyester, which I will get into in just a moment. So with cotton, linen, and hemp, we're looking at a very healthy cycle of life for this fabric. Cotton decomposes at actually a very fast rate of up to 5 months. And then linen and hemp are at an even quicker rate, which is up to 2 weeks. And so this is really, really healthy for the earth. And this speaks to the fabric coming from the earth and us putting it together and understanding that it is then going back to the earth without harm. So cotton, linen, and hemp are entirely from plants. And so when we're using fabrics or any other material, we can apply this to every piece of our life that is coming organically from the earth. When we're returning it to the earth, it's not going to be problematic. And so this switch in this mindset is really, really important, of understanding what this is that I'm buying. So these 3 fabrics are really, really healthy, because when they're then going to the landfill and they take such a short amount of time to decompose. In contrast, some other really popular fabrics like polyester and spandex are taking a much longer time to decompose, or actually cannot even decompose at all. So polyester is a very alarming rate as well. Polyester can take up to 200 years to decompose. And then spandex and sequins actually can completely do not decompose. So that is going to be waste that is on this earth forever. When we're talking about polyester, not only are we talking about the inability for it to decompose, but we're also talking about the harm that it's having in water. So polyester, in contrast to cotton, linen, and hemp, is not made from earth's materials. Polyester is man-made, so it's not coming from plants like cotton, linen, and hemp is. For polyester, because it's being man-made, there are small pieces of plastic within the fabric, and this is problematic for our not only the landfill, but it's being pushed into our water as well. And this is where we get into water pollution. So we're actually seeing that with the polyester plastic in the fabrics, it's going into our waterways through our sewage, which is because we're washing our polyester fabrics in our washing machines. It's then going to the sewage and finding its way into our waterways. And tiny pieces of plastic there's been research that show that it's really harmful to the life in the water. And there's been studies that show small pieces of plastic in specific areas of water that they've done research in. And some of these animals that it is harming is actually seafood to us. So it's really harmful to the overall entire cycle of life for both our animals and ourselves as well. So I think with there, we will take our 5-minute break, and then we'll get into the empowerment piece of this work. So if everyone wants to take a break, we can come back at 6:53. And it looks like it's 53. I'll just wait like 30 more seconds, and hopefully everyone made their way back, and then we'll begin again. Can you all see me? Is it good?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. All right, everyone. I hope most of you made your way back. So thank you for listening this far. And now I'd like to get more into the empowerment side of things and looking at what can we do as Métis and Indigenous people moving forward, and remembering that we are the leaders in climate as people who have always taken care of the land and have always had these cultural practices of this trend, reduce, reuse, recycle. We've always had this already in our communities. So moving forward from looking at what's going on behind the scenes, we're going to remember who we are as a people, as Métis people and Indigenous people. And so I want to share 2 stories with you about the nature of our people and our culture and how it relates to this sustainability trend that we have always been a part of, and we are empowered to continue and be leaders in. So for this first slide, it's about remembering that we have always been in alignment with the natural law. So we've always had the teachings of when we're hunting to use every single part of what we're able to get of the animal. And so this is remembering that story of these objects I'm sure are very familiar to you and your families, and using these animal hides and furs as a part of our clothing when they're being hunted for meat. And so I just shared a few photos here with you of some mitts and my grandma's jacket that she had. And again, I'm sure we all have knowledge of this practice and these items in our family that are so dear to us. And just remembering that this is who we have always been as a people. We've always used what has already been given to us, and we have always found use for it. I also included these two pictures of a goose and a duck because I wasn't able to get pictures of some of the things that I know my grandmother used to make. But again, talking about this discussion where we have always used pieces that we have already come across for meat. And so I've always heard stories of my grandma making mattresses and pillows with feathers or even large winter jackets. And it's always been a very common thing within our communities. And it's really important to remember that it's been common for us to use these items that have already been coming from the land, and then remember that when it's being returned to the land, this means that it's not going to be harmful. In the next conversation, when we're also talking about what's been going on in our communities and cultural practices that we have always had, I also wanted to talk about the story that not only have we always used items that are already coming from the land, but we've always had this culture of upcycling as well, even if the materials did not come directly from the land. And I think the Hudson's Bay wool blanket is such a good staple of this story in Métis history and culture and Indigenous culture of having this reduce, reuse, recycle pattern. And so the capote is a really good story of upcycling. So the capote is a long, traditionally European winter coat. And what started happening was this Hudson's Bay wool blanket started being traded across Turtle Island during the fur trade. So this blanket was being manufactured and distributed within Europe, and it was making its way over here to Turtle Island and being distributed across the different communities and nations here. So what started happening with this blanket then is we see the birth of the capote with this Hudson's Bay wool blanket. And I love this last photo that shows some Blackfoot community members wearing this capote that is in the style of the Hudson's Bay wool blanket, because I think it just demonstrates how far this art and work of upcycling went. And it's a reminder of this story that we have always used what is available to us, made use for it, and continued to share with community. So when we're remembering who we have always been as a people and being empowered by this education and this knowledge that is in our families and might have been lost, when we're remembering this, it's we want to walk forward in this knowledge and navigate how we can take this forward now. So after some discussions around remembering what has always been in our communities, if anyone would like to share what we can do today to reduce harm that is caused by fashion, if you feel comfortable sharing in the chat or talking, and then I'll share with you afterwards some things that I have been doing to reduce my footprint. Yes, thank you, Colette and Hannah. Yeah, secondhand stores for sure. Thank you, Millie. That's an amazing story, Ryan, and someone upcycling old sweaters into mittens. That's beautiful. Wearing clothing for much longer. Thrifting. We've had a lot of people mention thrifting and secondhand stores. Those are really important. Awesome. So thank you so much, everybody, for sharing. Oh, we have a few more. Yes, being mindful is really important. And learning how to mend clothing is really important. And that's going to be something I will be touching on. thank you so much, everybody, for sharing. Again, I think it's really important when we come together and share our different ideas, because everybody is coming from a different space, and it's really good to have lots of different perspectives. So thank you again for sharing. Now I'll just be sharing with you some of the things that I myself have been working on doing, and I just wanted to share with you. So the first thing that comes to mind for me is starting to check clothing labels. So like I shared with you earlier, this was a really big surprise to me about the harm of polyester. And I think it was so surprising to me because of the amount of clothing that is polyester. So I think naturally I just thought that it wasn't as big of a deal as it was. And when I looked in my closet and saw so much polyester, I didn't think twice about it. So I encourage you to remember those teachings I shared with you about where our fabrics are coming from and what they are doing when they're being returned to the earth. And so it's when we're looking at buying new clothing, it's so important to actually check the label, which is something that I have never done before. And it's really good knowledge to share with others and to incorporate into our habits when we do need to buy a new piece of clothing. So when we are choosing clothing, we want to go for plant-based materials, which is going to be cotton, linen, and hemp. And we want to avoid plastic-based materials or materials that are entirely non-biodegradable, like polyester, spandex, and sequins. The next point for me is I've tried to shift my mindset to seeing clothing as investments. So as a younger person with access to social media, it was always hard for me to not engage with these trends that we're seeing on social media of ordering bulk clothing for such a small cost from nations across the world. And we see this so much on social media. And I think as young people in this culture of fast fashion, needing a new outfit every day, it's hard to avoid that. And so for me, trying to shift my mindset to seeing clothing as an investment has really helped me, and something that I encourage for others. So when we're looking at a piece of clothing, when we're looking at a shirt that's $5, it's easy to convince yourself that this is better than buying a different shirt for 5 times the amount for $25, and shifting our mindset to seeing it as an investment and understanding that this $5 shirt actually isn't going to last us very long, even though it's so little cost for us right now. In the long run, we're actually going to be spending more money on these lower cost clothing than if we do see clothing as investments and invest in those clothing pieces. So this has been really important in my journey. But then at the same time, when we're talking about seeing clothing as investments, we also have to have the conversation of income and what's available to people. So not everyone has the availability to see clothing as investments and buy a pair of pants that is better material for $140. And so that's why when I'm talking about this, I also want to include the ideas of minimalist wardrobe and also thrifting. So minimalist wardrobe is important in this discussion because when we're buying clothing as investments, and these clothing pieces, and we don't have as much availability as other people when buying larger cost clothing pieces, it can be difficult. And so when we're looking at it, it is helpful to also see it as sort of taking a more minimalist perspective to it. So when we are buying a pair of pants that is higher cost, ensuring or having the mindset that this pair of pants that I'm buying can go with this shirt and this shirt and this shirt and this shirt, having that discussion with ourselves in our mind and seeing that we don't need to buy a large wardrobe of expensive clothing, but we can keep it more minimal. And then as well in this discussion is of course thrifting. So like I said, not everyone has the availability for higher cost clothing, and that's where thrifting also becomes really important in this process. With thrifting, we can find pieces of clothing that are higher quality and that have a longer cycle of life. And this gives the opportunity for people who may not be able to buy a $140 pair of pants the opportunity to still have pieces of clothing that are less harmful to the earth and just better life cycle in general. And the last point for me is also mending. So learning how to mend small holes or rips is really important, I believe, as well. I think today, with our younger people, we don't have the skill set for this. It hasn't really been taught to us as much as some of our older generations. Our parents and grandparents may easily know how to sew up a small patch, but I think for us younger people, we don't know very much. And so I want to bring this up, mending, as a young person who has taught myself through YouTube. I want to encourage others to take this on themselves. So when we're investing in higher quality pieces, and then we're combining this with the ability to mend them, we are creating a very long life cycle for our pieces of clothing. So taking the time to go on YouTube, you know, you can learn anything on YouTube these days. I learn everything on YouTube. To take the time to learn how to sew a small rip or repair a patch, I think is really, really important, and actually takes not very much time. So I definitely encourage this within your availability. So I'm going to close this presentation off with just sharing with you the ribbon skirts from the land project that I have been working on. So what I'm doing here is I'm trying to combine a cultural practice with traditional methods that we have always used. So I had, with my ribbon skirt sewing, I actually had a woman come to me and say that she really wanted a ribbon skirt, but she wanted it to be completely from the land and have it not be harmful when she's returning it to the land. And so this project is kind of where this started and really got me thinking about what I can do and how I can do this. So I was lucky to have stories told to me before about the traditional way of dyeing jewelry or pieces of animal hide. And so I had always heard that we were dyeing things like porcupine quills with berry juice. And so I took this knowledge that I had and I combined it with some research that I was able to do today just with Google and created this project. So what I'm doing here in these photos is I'm dyeing a piece of 100% cotton, undyed and unbleached. So that's the first step in the importance of this sustainable project, is ensuring that that material is organic cotton and has not touched any processed materials at all. And this includes dye, because dye is also can be toxic to our waterways. So when I take that piece of cotton, I'm then dyeing it with 100% earth materials, plants and vegetables, fruits and vegetables, sorry. So with this particular skirt, she wanted more of a purple tone, and I didn't really know what I was going to get. I just went with what I had. I was really, really lucky. I actually was at work one day and we got a donation from a local farm, and they had given this purple cauliflower and beets, and it just seemed perfect. So I took it and that's what I decided to use. So I boiled that for a long time. And then I also boiled my cotton in vinegar, and then I let the cotton sit in this fruit dye overnight. And so in this last picture, you can see what I was able to get. And now it's kind of like a light purple red shade, and it's so beautiful, and I'm so happy with it. So this is my very first skirt from this project, and something I'm really looking forward to continuing. It's been really important to me throughout all this knowledge that I've been able to gain. It's really important for me to continue this process of using materials that are from the earth, and so when it's being returned, it's not harmful. And I think this is a really great way to connect to my culture in this way, because like we all see, ribbon skirts are really, really important today in ceremony, and for all of our events. We're seeing them being worn everywhere by a lot of people, and I would like to contribute to my community and my culture with this project of creating a ribbon skirt that is not only traditional to our communities now, but having it be 100% from the earth and not harmful at all. So that concludes the end of my presentation. I want to lift my hands to you and say hi. Thank you so much for listening, and Niwaga Makanak. I thank you so much for being here today and allowing me to share my knowledge with you. And I really hope that you were able to learn something new today. And I encourage you to carry these teachings on to other people in your life, and hopefully just feel empowered by this information and knowing that this is who we have always been as a people, and it's just about now bringing it back into kind of our collective identity. So thank you again, and thank you to Métis Nation of Alberta.
And thank you so much, Alexa, for your presentation. I think we all learned a lot about your knowledge and a lot of things you have shared with us. And yeah, I just put in the chat that if anyone are interested, you are welcome to fill up our follow-up survey. This is the first session of our speaker series that we invite community members or industry professionals to share their knowledge. And yeah, your feedback would help us to build our future engagements. And at the end of the survey, if you are an M&A citizen and can provide your citizenship number, you'll be able to enter your name into a draw to win either a Desert Métis skirt or shirt from Alexa's store. So you will also receive this survey by email in the next few days as well. Yeah, I have shared a link in the chat. I'm just wondering if anyone has any questions or anything to share in the chat. You're very welcome to do so. You're welcome to unmute yourself, just share any of your final thoughts.
Well, maybe just jump in if anybody else is thinking of a question, and thank you. Thank you everybody for joining us today, and thank you, Alexa, so much for sharing. I learned a lot, and I think you have a really valuable approach, and it's wonderful to hear your story and share your knowledge. And I really liked what you said about using this to walk forward with the knowledge together. And I think this is what we're trying to do with this kind of speaker spotlight and showcase examples of, Métis culture and sustainability and how those work hand in hand. So once again, thank you, Alexa.
Thanks, Ali. And in case you didn't see, also I put my email in the chat in case anyone needed to get in touch. So there's that as well.
Great. If nobody has any questions, then we'll probably just wrap up. Any last thoughts?
Good job, Alexa. You're making our ancestors proud. We're cousins, by the way.
Thanks, Hannah.
Just one quick question, if I can, please. Alexa, what about, have you given any thought to decorating your skirts? Like if we can't use ribbons anymore, I like what I'm hearing from you. I like the idea of going organic cotton and using natural dyes. With porcupine quills and scales, I also do natural dyes with my decorations. So it would be the next step. So I would love to be able to do that, but I can't see wearing fish scales or anything on a skirt. So would you have any other ideas on what we could do to decorate the skirts?
Yeah, totally. Thank you. That's so awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I'd love to hear that you're dyeing with natural materials. That's awesome. So for my ribbon skirt, I actually was able to get my hands on some cotton ribbons, kind of. They're not technically ribbons, but they're like pieces of cotton that are the size of a ribbon. And I could connect with you further and share that resource with you. And so the next step for me is going to be dyeing those pieces of cotton that I found, and then it will lay on the skirt like a ribbon. Oh, I think you're muted.
Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, and I'd love to talk more.
Okay.
I think somebody asked in the chat if you put on dyeing workshops, Alexa.
Yeah, that's a good point, Hannah. Dyeing silk ribbons. I would need to look into silk, the life cycle of silk. That's a great idea though.
And if any of our participants has any ideas about what information you would like to hear more about Alexa and her knowledge, feel free to fill out our survey and express your interest. And we can always invite our guest speakers back for their different knowledges and to talk in depth about their expertise.
Yeah, for sure. And anybody else that has knowledge in any other areas, sustainability related, we'd love to hear, have a conversation about it. So I think I'll stop the recording now.